We were very fortunate in cancer medicine because this was a huge spend. Now, the charities have taken an enormous hit with COVID. Next year, CRUK have been absolutely upfront. They're going to cut £1 million off their budget. So the grant rounds are going to be extremely tight because they, by early next year, want to have saved this money. So you don't want to go in at the moment to CRUK because there's a whole load of us with renewals coming up who know there's not enough money on the table. So it's going to be very tight. But CRUK, we will come out of this, and CRUK are a big funder for us, and that's a lot of money. So they have a clinical research committee. And this is where your trial's going to be sponsored by an external CTU, because CRUK will also sponsor studies. But if it's an external clinical trials unit going to be the sponsor, this is where you would go. But for the career level to lead on these, you need to be an established independent researcher. So as a trainee, or this is as you come out and you're starting to get established. But they will basically fund across anything. It's up to 10 years. They will now do early phase or feasibility studies for 4 years, and obviously a phase 3 study with a randomization. You're not going to get a setup and a readout in a 4-year timetable. They say it's up to 150,000 a year, but obviously if that's over 10 years, that's a very substantial grant. And they also will consider larger amounts with appropriate justification. And this is where Matrix is funded, it's where TracerX is funded, it's where things like Precision Panc are funded, and those are much bigger amounts, but have come through CRC, and Clinical Research Committee also does their scientific milestone reporting and their stop-go decisions if they're not meeting targets. So that's Clinical Research Committee. It sits currently, well, it missed a meeting, but it's been sitting twice a year. It's moving up to 4 times a year to speed up the process because it's been criticised for being slow. There's outline and then full application stages. And the full application goes to an expert review panel to look at the science. And they're moving away because they used to fund the trial, and people would come in and get a trial funded and then say, we're going to make a separate application for the translational science. And partly driven by Charlie Swanton and others of us on the committee, we've just, Charlie CRUK's chief physician, we've said that's madness. Why have double jeopardy? You know, if the translational science is going to be good and it's the point of the trial, put it all in the bundle. So, and I just think that otherwise you just end writing 2 applications. It's depressing. But as I say, applications go to an expert review panel, but those decisions from the panels are ratified by Clinical Research Committee, who make strategic choices. So if the expert review panel, for example, have put forward 5 prostate cancer studies and whatever, at CRC, they'll look at the pot available and they'll say, you know, we fund, CRUK funds research across areas of unmet need, etc., and they won't necessarily fund all 5, and that's the sort of strategic choice that's made. So they will look at unmet need, you know, radiotherapy trials have been a particular area of interest, so those would be moved up on the funding scheme as a strategic decision. And so CRUK asked their committees to make those so they deliver to their strategy, as well as to, it has to be fundable science, but there'll be some juggling, and that, I guess, is out of your control as an applicant. That means, you know, that's what else has come in. So CRC is clinicians, statisticians, patient public involvement, and translational scientists. So the stats get a really good going over. The PPI is listened to, and if you haven't got the study group endorsement from the NCRI, you're in trouble, basically, because they say, why on earth hasn't this been to the study group? And biomarker studies, they've got the 3 S's, but I always forget which the 3 S's are, because it's basically sample size, statistics, specimens, SOPs, storage, and I forget which one of the 3, because all of those are the ones, the S's, that get drilled down on in terms of your application. The reason I said with CRC, these are for studies externally sponsored. CRUK will also sponsor trials, and that's through their Centre for Drug Development, CDD, which has a separate committee, the New Agents Committee, which I sat on and then chaired for 6 years, but it's now chaired by Pat LaRusso from Yale, I think Pat is at the moment. So it's got an overseas chair. Pat is always, she's a an early phase trialist in the States, really admired what CRUK has done for trial and funding of research and the innovation they'd shown, and actually asked if she could join the committee, and they decided to take her on as chair. So she's very supportive of them. And New Agents Committee will look at projects where they need to do some of the manufacturing, because they've got two manufacturing sites, one for biologics and one for small molecules. They'll fund some preclinical research, and then they'll fund the clinical trial. And they do clinical development partnerships, and at the moment, post-COVID and the current, well, we're not quite post-COVID funding thing, they're very much focused on these because they're wanting studies to come in with some funding involved as well. So often with an industry partner, but they'll look at the background IP because the rights remain with the company, but CRUK gets a license to take on the trial. But then if the company, after the CRUK has delivered a trial, don't want to take the drug forward, the compound forward, CRUK gets it back to sell on, and they've successfully done that. So they will then out-license or develop themselves. So they keep, and if the company, the business partner, develops the drug, CRUK basically get the trial costs back, or to try and put funding back into the charity. So this is a clinical development partnership model. So NAC sits 3 times a year as a full panel, but has exploratory review panels. So there's actually 6 panels to go to a year. The exploratory stage funds up to $500,000, puts your project on their portfolio and assigns a CDD project team to help develop it. And then you go back in for a full application, which is $2 to $3 million to run an early phase trial. And the applicants present at both of those stages and answer questions directly. And NAC is clinicians, chemists, CMC expertise, translational, drug development scientists, the lot. And when I was chair of this, I got all the ECMC leads to agree with CDD support that young investigators would be supported through this route. Basically, that us old lags would support our junior colleagues and wouldn't insist on being the lead on every application. And yeah, pretty much all the ECMCs have signed up to this. And so we now, and we pulled together a list at the time, so it's a couple of years old, of all the young investigators. So they get circulated with trial opportunities to try and bring that next generation on. You also consider an observer on NAC, and that's gone through JING, the ECMC Junior Investigator Group, have helped place observers on NAC to see how it works. And as I've said, COVID funding challenges mean at the moment, projects with industry partners need to come with some financial commitment. They can't come just with an interesting compound. And as I touched on, CRUK have invented a new clinical research careers committee. It's new and we've not met yet, but it's going to look at all the clinical career and new investigator fellowships, the clinical trial fellowships and population health fellowships. And it's an advisory body to CRUK for research careers and workforce. So they've got a real focus on developing the next clinical research career workforce. So I think that's really positive. And then this is something that has been driven by Charlie Swanton, as well as the Clinical Academic Training Partner program, to try and make sure there is a next generation of you who come through and want to do research for our patients. Touch on the other big funders. We're all aware of NIHR and the clinical research networks. And the reason for putting this up to remind you about it is that if you get a trial going, get it on the portfolio, because it really helps. So if you get peer-reviewed funding, you can get it on the portfolio. And there can be a little bit of negotiation. So even if it's local charity funding, if you can show there's an external review process, you can often get on the portfolio. It helps with resource and costs because it's a different costing template within the trusts. So it makes your trial cheaper in terms of trust sign-off. So it is really worth being on the portfolio. But the other thing is that the NIHR has multiple funding streams, and they have both weird and wonderful focus calls and response mode where you can just go in. And there are really multiple committees. There's research for patient benefit, there's RISC, which is innovation, speculation and creativity. I don't know what that is. New and emerging applications of technology, presumably that's very technological. But there's translational research, feasibility study projects, the HTA, health technology devices, if you're into devices, and then evidence and mechanism evaluation, the ENI committee as well. So there is a lot of routes to go and explore. And I picked this off their website showing the, you know, that they can just go for something really specific. You know, suspending proton pump inhibitors to reduce clostridial infection. You know, something can just pop up because there's been a push from NICE to actually look at this. So it's worth looking at their website or just keeping an eye out for something, you know, that you could as a collaborative get somebody to help you go for that's very specific, or there are their funding streams. And then there's the MRC, which is the Medical Research Council is rebranding. So we'll all be familiar with this one, but this is their new logo. And that's because UKRI has gone for all of their research councils having the similar branding. And they've also just established the experimental medicine panel. And this is because Patrick Chinnery, who's their senior clinician, and a neurologist who was also an SHO with us up in Newcastle back in the day, but now is at Cambridge and very involved with the MRC. So Patrick announced and blogged last year about his precision medicine accelerator. And the first push on this is their new experimental medicine panel to bridge the gap. Patrick's asked if I'll chair this for him, and the first meeting is in November. And Ian McInnes, who's a really nice rheumatologist up in Glasgow and has very similar views to me, I know, on supporting the next generation and why we need to see that coming through. So he and I are chairing this panel. And applications have to involve an experimental innovation or challenge to explore disease mechanism. And it's got to be based around the generation of a mechanistic hypothesis. So they're going to have a twice yearly call, and Louise Jones, who's project managing this for the MRC, has secured an annual budget of 10 million. So you can have any size of duration of application and any stages, but if it's a study, there's the PI eligibility exception. Other than that, they want to encourage the next generation. And this is gaps in our understanding of the causes and progression and for treatment of human disease. And it wants to expand the scale and scope of the MRC's translational work and support. They've said in the aims for this is to support the next generation of experimental and medicine and translational researchers. So, and to enhance target validation. So I think this should be, once it finds its feet, and as I say, we just got outlines at the panel in November because it's just starting. So this is coming. The other place you can potentially go for translational funding is their DPSF scheme. This, again, is just worth looking at the website. It's a translational strategy. It's a two-stage process, and you get really detailed feedback from stage 1 to develop your stage 2. I've been involved but never led one of these because they're a little bit further down the pathway than the clinical trials. But here it's partnerships with industry and charities that add value are very much encouraged. So that's another way to get a sort of translational funding, a sort of slightly back down the pathway to a clinical trial, although the idea is DPFS funding will then lead to a clinical trial. And then I wanted to round up by talking about industry with a bit of a shameless plug for an upcoming opportunity, because Newcastle University has NUACTs, which are there. They've invested a huge amount of money in this, which was for academic track researchers with 5 years of salary support and a consumable budget and a PhD student and mentorship to help people develop fellowships. But this was obviously very challenging because that wasn't 5 years of salary support at a clinical salary. So they invented this partnership idea, which was supposed to be ideally and could be with the NHS in Newcastle, where they would fund half of a consultant, or so as you went into a consultant job, you would get 50% NHS, 50% university funding, and a 5-year post to develop yourself. So as a sort of 5-year fellowship. But the idea was that, but you also could have an external partner, and you would then be building strategic relations with Newcastle University and the external partners, and you would allow that foot in both camps for career development. And the research would need to be fellow-led. So they wanted an applicant to develop and lead their own research and a working partnership. And I thought this sounded really cool. We have a very close partnership with our CRUK funded drug development team with a company in Cambridge, which is not AstraZeneca, which will become clear because they have a similar partnership, and I've got the details of that with Cambridge University as well, but not quite what we've achieved in Newcastle. But it's a company that we work very closely with in drug development that supports Newcastle in that way. And they have now signed up to a industry new pact where the fellow is going to be employed by Newcastle on an honorary consultant contract at the appropriate level, but an honorary contract in industry as a medical project manager. And it's going to be a 5-year position, leading in early phase clinical trials with a consultant role with the team of us, myself, Alistair Greystoke and Yvette Drew on the early phase unit, working with the drug discovery team with a funded PhD for 4 years of the 5 to do a lab thing. And we're advertising early next year, which is why it's a shameless plug. And the exit strategy is that, because the university wanted to see this, I've got the trust to agree that after 5 years, because we've looked at who'll be retiring, there'd be potential 50% Newcastle University A plus B model, 50% NHS funding to stay, which is what I want, with us as the team on the trials unit. You would be potential, I don't know why it's doing that, sorry, I'll go back. Potentially industry employment, because a person would be employable, or an academic fellowship route. So we've got this agreed, and this would fit in onto our CRUK route or model as at that point after the clinical lectureship. So it's people who've got a CCT. I said Cambridge had a similar one. Cambridge have their experimental medicine training program. This is 4 years co-funded, again, 50-50, with either GSK or AstraZeneca, where you get industry and clinical mentors, and you can either be in industry or in the university. What we're doing in Newcastle is all the way through. The idea in industry is you actually would be project managing an early phase trial, which we couldn't be involved in Newcastle because there'd be a conflict of interest. So you wouldn't be recruiting to your own trial, but you would be project managing it for the industry partner. But anyway, Cambridge have a similar thing, and they have 5 ongoing lectureships at pre-consultant level and more than 10 PhDs as part of their EMI program. So again, it's worth looking at what Cambridge, and the website is there, what Cambridge have available. And the other people who've done this are King's in London, have got AZ fellowships. And to be fair, this is what started me, because it was the AstraZeneca who was chairing the MRC's translational project team who mentioned this to me and said, what about you doing something similar? But Newcastle was very keen to do longer than a 1+1 year thing. But so this, what AZ are funding with King's, is a 1-year sabbatical where you go into, you get some research time in industry. And AZ see that as the fresh eyes vibrancy. So these are some details they gave me about there. They've got a very flexible job description to try and fit. And again, theirs is at consultant level, but it's just it's a 2-year thing, but to get you some research experience in industry. So I think these are really very interesting and attractive options. And that was all I had to say. And I thought I'd put up thank you for listening. Good luck. It is worth it. It seems complicated, but it's great fun. I just think it's, you know, it's that challenge. It's the meeting people. It's the difference, and the changing job is the thing for me. And this is a picture of somewhere I've not been for a long time. It's March since I last went anywhere. Other than that, I was going to London 2 to 3 times a month, usually with an overnight, and my car was usually parked here in the station car park. But this is just to remind you, those of you who are not northerners, that if you want to come north, it's a great place to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your talk. I think that's really, really useful, because I'm not sure if you caught the earlier email, but we've got a huge variety of people on the line at the moment, so lots of different grades of people. So it's particularly useful to hear about all the various opportunities at different stages of training and the practicalities for that. So that was really cool.
Well, you gave a good briefing, Johnny, so I did know it was a range of you.
Yeah, cool. So there's a few questions come in. Karen's posted in the group. Karen, are you happy to ask your question yourself?
Yeah, so thank you so much for such an interesting talk. And as a former Newcastle trainee, it's also really nice to see a photo of that beautiful city. I just wanted to ask, I put my question in the chat, but it's great to hear about all these innovations in academic training, and particularly the inclusion of industry. Do you think that these industry and academic collaborations are going to be particularly vital in a post-COVID funding era, and therefore actually the role of industry perhaps needs to be incorporated into oncology training in general?
I think they will be more important, because I think funding, the government at the moment hasn't cut funding to the MRC, etc. But because that politically would look terrible while we're working this out. But there's going to be an economic downturn, so I think funding's going to be tight. So I think it will be getting funding from elsewhere. But also, I think the world has changed. When I was a junior doctor, it was what were called time expired senior registrars who nobody wanted as a consultant went to work in industry, and that is absolutely not the case now. And there's pretty senior people. I mean, Jean-Charles Soria, one of the leading lights in oncology in Europe, went from the IGR to AstraZeneca for 3 years, said he'd be back, and he's back. He went back out of industry, he got the experience at a very senior level and has come back. And people do that, but and can dip in and out of industry. So it's not now seen as, oh, well, they couldn't make it. I think it's, but also, I think industry colleagues are good collaborators, and yeah, they have to make a profit. And there are bad sides to industry, but the people I work with closely are passionate about their science and the drugs they're trying to develop, and want to do the right clinical trials for patients. And we've seen that in the more innovative trials, and drugs like the TRAC inhibitors being licensed off the back of phase 1 studies because somebody did the right trial. And I think that industry can see the benefit of getting people with ideas and younger training. I was laughed at because of the MRC things I'm doing at the moment. I said to my daughter, oh, that's a really cool application. I've never heard of these aquapores. And she said, Mum, everybody's heard of aquapores. And then she looked them up and she said, oh, they were discovered in 1993. And I said, yeah, your dad and I qualified in 92. Nobody's taught me about an aquapore. So the world has changed, and you've got senior people like me who don't know stuff. And getting younger people into industry, you've also got senior people in industry who just, if it's not in their sphere, don't know stuff, and they see it as a benefit. So I think it will continue, and I think it's a good thing.
Great. I've got another question along a similar sort of theme to do with like the dipping in and out of things and flexibility. I think, training, you described your early pathway in training at the start of your talk. I think you sort of get guided down a route a lot more nowadays. And I mean, do you think that, in today's modern era, you would have the same flexibility to get all the experience that you've got? And, how do you think today's landscape, is for people who want to have your kind of career?
Well, I think I was a problem because I didn't know what I wanted to do at all. But I think there still is the flexibility because the different points you can go in, and not all academic foundation doctors continue an academic career. And I've got a very good AFP at the moment based on the trials unit, and I'm well aware that my husband's trying to lead him astray to be a cardiologist because he is very good and he clearly loves general medicine, possibly more than he loves oncology, but I'm working on him. And, in some ways it doesn't matter. So I think you don't have to have a trajectory. And I think it's in some ways a bit muddling and depressing that, when you're at medical school, it seems like there's always those colleagues you meet who know what they want to do and just have this focus. But life doesn't work like that. And I think you can dip in and out. And the thing you have to do is seize the opportunities that come up. And then if it isn't the right opportunity for you, or it doesn't work out, you keep going and another one will come around the corner, is my philosophy on this. And there is that flexibility, despite the everybody trying to make a pathway, which I think is sort of helpful because you can see where you might join it. But it doesn't have to be like that. And I think I mean, when we interview for our CRUK PhDs, clinical PhDs coming up, we will shortlist people if they've not had an AFP or not done any research, if they look smart and they look motivated and write a good application.
Fine, that's really useful because I've had another question to do with the practicalities like that. You know, how important is it to have been a career academic to get your funding and get on that thing? It's what somebody's asked.
I don't think it's what you don't want to do is throw away good people who are clearly smart, have got good ideas, are motivated and want to do it, just because they didn't tick the boxes along the way. So I think if you've got absolutely no experience, you need a mentor and you need a really good rationale. But if you've gained those bits of research, you've been in a Notch collaborative, you've done stuff, and then you say, and now I've got an absolute passion for research and I want to do a PhD, and you're good at interview, there's no reason why you're not appointed. You don't have to have had an academic foundation thing and, you know, done bits and pieces. You know, showing some interest in research or having done that extra mile all the way through really helps. As in, you know, you didn't just go through your training and never do an audit, never publish a case report. Then your CV looks a bit empty when you're up against people who've done other stuff. But if it's clear you've not had the privilege during your, you know, 3 or 4 month research blocks, but you've still done extra stuff, in some ways I think you're more credible, and certainly you are more credible than somebody who's had that and say, oh yeah, well that project didn't quite work out and hasn't got the publications, but had the protected research time. So it can be a double-edged sword.
Thanks for that. I've had a question from Flo Chamberlain, so we're happy to take that, Flo.
Great, thanks. Hi, Prof, thank you so much for your talk. I just wanted to ask you about what your advice would be for people like myself who are applying for the PhDs in this round at the moment, given everything that's going on with funding from COVID.
Well, I mean, look at the ones that are there. There are CRUK ones. The MRC will have a round. I think you just go for it. We haven't had a cut to our PhD funding. CRUK have protected career funding over and above everything else. So all of us with CRUK centres have been asked to take a cut just in the money they'd already offered to try and help them manage their budget. They have absolutely protected their research career funding. So there are the same number out there.
Thank you.
So go for it.
Yeah, it's really encouraging, isn't it, that so far there hasn't been any cuts. So that's great. Well, I think, you know, we've hit break time, Prof Plummer. So that's amazing. Thank you so much for your talk. You know, your experience and passion for research is really inspiring, and what a career you've had so far. The CRUK is an important driver of patient-centered research and best practice, and I think we all value what you do. So thanks very much.
Pleasure. Well, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Not raining for once, but I shall.
So next up, guys, we've got a break for coffee. We restart at 11, if that's okay.